Hi everyone, this is the introduction to fiction video. So we're about to begin studying fiction. We've just finished our poetry unit. And in this course we're supposed to talk about poetry, fiction, and drama. And so now we're going to talk about fiction. So fiction is stories that we tell, right? And fiction literally means something that's not true, something that we've made up. And when we think about those stories and we think about how it is we're going to interpret those stories, think about what they mean, we have to think about all the little details that are going to be included in those stories. Realize that what happens is when an author makes up a story, right, when they tell us something that is not necessarily true, then they are going to have the ability to include certain kinds of details and exclude other kinds of details. And the details that they include in the story are going to be important in terms of telling us what we're potentially supposed to be thinking about the story. Okay, and so recognize that we always have to decide what to include and what to exclude. So even if you're telling a real story about something that happened to you, right? If you were at school and you wanted to tell a story about something, back when we used to go to school, and in class, and you wanted to say about there was, somebody in the class who got into an argument with the professor, right? Not you. You would never get an argument with the professor. But there was somebody else in the class who got into an argument with the professor. And you wanted to tell us the story about what happened there. Realize that you might give us bits and pieces of the dialogue back and forth, but you wouldn't necessarily say exactly what what each person said, every single word that was said, right? So you're going to not include all of that information. But there's all kinds of other information that you're not going to include. You're not going to tell us everything that the other students were doing, right? Maybe you might have one student who might, laugh or something, or one student who might feel uncomfortable and leave the classroom or something like that. But you won't tell us what every single student was doing. You won't tell us about all the people that walked by in the hall. You just saw somebody walk by in the hall, right? You won't necessarily tell us about that. You won't tell us what's going on outside the window. And then suddenly a cloud went by the sun and it got a little shady. That's not about what this story is about. We don't need to necessarily include all of that information. An airplane then flew by. We don't need to include all of that information to understand the main point of the story. So we're going to only include the information that is going to allow us to tell the story in a very specific way. Realize that if I went home and told my wife about the story about there was a student who got an argument with me in class, I might include different kinds of details from what the student might say if they went to tell their friends about what happened. Because I'm going to tell the story that makes me look good, of course, right? Makes the student seem like they're going to be a troublemaker. But the student is going to tell the story that's going to make them look good and make it seem like I'm unfair somehow. And so in each case, we're going to decide to include or exclude certain kinds of details. And so what we do when we're looking then at fiction, at a story that's been presented to us, is we say, what kinds of details have been included and what kinds of details have been excluded, right? What kind of information is here that helps me understand on some level what the overall idea of the story is supposed to be. And so you want to look very carefully at the little bits and pieces that the author included that help us understand what is the larger point they were potentially trying to get across. The author of a story does not need to tell a story, right? They don't need to write up a story. It's a lot of work to write a story, and you don't make much money for it, right? So it would be easier for an author to just not write a story. But if they are going to write a story, they can write it in any way that they want. They don't have to write it in a particular way. They can make up whatever they want. They can include whatever details they want. The story can move in whatever direction they want it to move in. And so what we're supposed to do when we're going to be looking at the story is thinking about what was put in there and how does that get us to think about a larger idea here. Stories are going to have a specific structure. There is going to be usually some kind of larger point that we're supposed to be getting in here. There's something holding the story together. The author had something in mind when they were writing it, and then we're supposed to come back and say, wait, what is that? What is that idea? And realize that you experience fiction in all kinds of ways. Usually you experience it on the screen. Movies and TV shows that you watch, we can consider them fiction. We usually will consider them drama. We'll talk about some of those things when we get to the drama section, but they're basically stories just like we're going to be reading on some level. And again, those are created. Somebody has to write a script. A director has to decide where they want to place the camera, what bits of dialogue to include, what kind of looks we want to see from the actor. And we're supposed to think from that, okay, what is the larger point that we're supposed to be getting from all of this? So I just want you to keep that in mind, because when we're going to be writing about fiction, that's one of the things we're going to be looking at. Let's look at the details that we see on the page and see how those details are leading us toward some kind of larger idea here. How are those details helping us understand what the larger meaning is supposed to be? So for this section, you've got a reading for an introduction to fiction, and we've got a short story, The Elephant in the Land of the Blind, that you're supposed to be reading. I have a question that I want you to answer about that. And then I've got a short writing assignment where I want you to tell 2 stories. Okay, I want you to tell a story, and this can be a completely made up story. It could be true if you want, or it could be completely made up. And I want you to tell it in 2 different ways. And I give the example in there of telling a story about, on your first day of, let's say, middle school. I could tell a story about the first day of middle school, falling down in the lunchroom and being embarrassed. There are 2 ways to tell that story. We can tell that story in a way that this is like the worst day of my life. Right? Fell down in the cafeteria on the first day of school, and for the next 3 years of school, people are going to be making fun of me. And I thought this was going to be an all new beginning for me, but I showed up on the first day and fell down in the cafeteria, and now my life is ruined for the rest of my time at this school. Or we could tell that story in a way that it would be funny, right? It's kind of amusing that I was walking around, I fell down, and people falling down sometimes is amusing to us. And so that could be funny. I could decide to say, hey, there's something amusing that happened to me. I could tell it either way. And so that's what I want you to do for this assignment. I want you to tell a story, a story that has the same basic events, but I want you to tell it in 2 ways. Maybe one that makes us sad, and then one that's going to be potentially inspiring, one that's going to be funny, one that's going to be potentially tragic. It should be the same basic story, but because of the kinds of details that you're going to include, we might think about that story differently. It might have a different meaning for us. So again, read that assignment, think about that. You'll write those 2 versions of the story and upload that to Blackboard.